Okay guys, this video is going to be about Excel and kind of an introduction to using it. When you open up Excel, this is what your spreadsheet will look like. You've got the spreadsheet down here with your columns going across and your rows going up and down. Easier way to remember that is columns stand up, and so they're going to go down. And a new column will be going across here. So here's your ribbon, kind of typical what you've seen in Word and PowerPoint with kind of unique differences based on Excel. You've got your insert, page layout, stuff like that. This is new for Excel. You've got a formula bar, which formulae, both mean formula, plural. Or you'll sometimes hear me say function instead of formula. All that means the same thing. It's just what you're kind of an input into Excel that returns a value of some kind, depending on the formula. You've also got a way here to manipulate your data by sorting and filtering, and then of course your review and your view. And the view is important because you can use that to freeze panes. And so I can freeze the top row, and if I scroll down, row 1 will always be there at the top. So that's pretty useful. Especially if you've got column headings that you want to make sure that you see all the time. Alright, so these rectangles in the spreadsheet, these are called cells, and each cell has a column and row reference. So this one happens to be C6, and you can use capitals or lowercase for the column letter. It doesn't matter, Excel will know what you're talking about. So you don't have to always go capital C6. You can just do lowercase c6 if that's easier for you. That's what I usually do. But yeah, and then if you can have a range of cells, which is going to be the cell in the top left corner going down to the cell in the bottom right corner. So this cell range is from B2 to E6. And then up in the name box here, this is the name box. This is kind of nice for being able to tell which cell you're in, especially if you're over here. You can just look up here and be like, okay, I'm in T23. As opposed to having to go all the way up to see which one you're in, or all the way over to see which one you're in. So that's useful. And then that's also nice for creating a named range. You can type in any name you want here to reference later, and it'll always reference these cells. This is your formula bar. This is going to be where you, or at least one of the places that you can type in what you want. So you can do a function or a formula in here, or you can type it in down here. You can just select the cell and start typing, and it'll show up in here. But we'll get to functions and formulas in a bit here. First, I want to talk about references. So again, formula and function mean the same thing, and formulas and formulae mean the same thing. It's just plural formula. So there are 3 types of references that you'll be using. First one is called relative. It's probably the most common. But they look like this, just kind of regular cell reference. And remember when I talked about ranges, this is what a range looks like. So you do the top leftmost cell, colon, bottom rightmost cell, and that's your range. So D2 to F14 would look like this. That's this range of cells. Oops, that is not that range of cells. That is that range of cells. So you just do top left cell, colon, bottom right cell, and that gives you the range. When they're used in a formula, the position of the cell referenced relative to the cell in which the formula is located is stored, and not the cell. So what I mean by this is if I go back here, and I've got another sheet set up. So here are my relative references is an example of it. So I've got 2, 4, 6 here, and then over here I want to know what those numbers times 2 equal. So here I've got the equal sign A3 asterisk 2. Asterisk is your multiplier, so that's your, I guess, X if you normally write that by hand. But anyway, so I want to take the cell A3 and times that by 2. So if we look here, this cell is in C5 and I want to get to A3. To get there, I have to go 2 rows up and 2 columns over, and that gets me that value. Now if I copy this formula down, which I've already done, you see this one goes to A4, whereas this one was A3, this one's A4, because I go down a cell and it's saying, okay, well, the cell above me went 2 rows up and 2 columns over, so I'll do the same thing. So it grabs this one and gives you 8. Same thing with this one. It decided to go 2 up, 2 over, grabs 6, and return 12. So that's what I mean by the the position of the cell relative to the cell that you're putting the formula in. That's stored. So this one went 2 rows up, 2 columns over, so did this one and this one to get their values. Now the next type is called an absolute reference, and this is what it looks like. You've got the $ before the column and before the row. You can do it just before the column or just before the row, it depends. Just play around with it to see what each one of them does. And you can also reference a range here. Just remember, it's all about the Benjamins. You just use the $, which is shift 4, the number 4. And make sure you always put it before the column and before the row. If you did something like this, Excel wouldn't know what to do with that. So make sure it looks like this, where you have it before the column, before the row. Absolute references are useful because when they use them in a formula, the cell itself is referenced, not the distance. So if we go back here and look at my absolute reference here, so I just want to equal this column, or we could do something else. Let's do this 1 times 2. So I referenced F3, made sure I used absolute. So instead of going, okay, well I went 2 columns up, 2 columns over for this next row, it won't grab 4, it'll grab 2 because I told it to absolute reference. So as you can see here, when I copied the formula down, it stayed the same. And with copying, I don't know if you noticed what I did, there's this little green square in the bottom right corner. You get it to where you have the black plus sign, and then you just click and drag down, and that'll copy it. That's pretty useful for copying. As you can see there, the formula that I entered up here was copied down to everything, and it's referencing only this cell. I'm not doing anything with 4 and 6 because I'm only referencing this cell with absolute references. Okay, now the third and final one that I'm going to go over is called a structured reference. This is what they look like. You've got your name of your column in here, and you've got bracket here, and these brackets are to the right of the P key on your keyboard. So about the top right corner of your keyboard, you've got your enter, and it's above those. So just look for the P, and that's this one. Look for that and go to the right of that, and you'll get those brackets. You don't have to do shift at all for those, otherwise you'll get curly, which you don't want. So you just want the square brackets with the column name, and then close it with another square bracket. And these are used in tables if you use them in Excel. And since Access is a bunch of tables, it's a database of tables, you'll use them in Access as well if you want to use a column in your table. And when they're used in a formula, the entire column is referenced. So when I come back here, I'll delete this real quick. So here I've got a list of 4 types of homes, and I want to know how much money I made or lost on the purchase and sell. So the way I would do that is I would do the equal sign, because every time you do a formula you'll want to start with the equal sign, and then I do the square bracket, and you can see the list of column headings comes up here. So I want to do sold price first, and when that's highlighted you can just hit tab, and then I want to close it with another square bracket, and then I want to subtract, so the hyphen subtracts, and I'm going to subtract the purchase price. Again, I just hit tab. As you notice, there's a blue block around the sold price because it's referencing that entire column, and red around the purchase price, it's referencing that entire column. So then I hit enter here. As you can see here, I only put the formula here, but since I use structured references, the entire column got that same formula. And so for here, you can check my math. I lost 10 grand, which you can see 100,000 minus 90,000 would give you $10,000. And since I sold it for less than I bought it for, then I lost money. This one I made 50 grand, this one I didn't make anything, and this one I made 10 grand. And if you had 50 of these homes, like if you had specifics as far as address or location or anything like that, and you wanted to find the difference between them, again, you just have to enter it in this first row, or this first cell in the column, and then it'll copy it down to everything, like this one did. So yeah, that's a structured reference. These are pretty useful, pretty nice. And now we'll kind of go to functions and formula. So when you do this, you just want to hit equals, and that tells Excel you want it to do some kind of calculation, and that's going to start any kind of a function, whether it's one that you use built-in in Excel or one that you create your own. Which, for Chapter 1, you will be creating your own, and that's just using simple subtraction, addition, multiplication, division, and a little bit of algebra. And those keys, plus sign, pretty common to be your addition. And if you have a 10 key number pad, which if you have a newer 15.6-inch laptop or a 17-inch, you should have that on your right side, and you'll have a big plus sign. The other way to get to it is do shift equals. So if I do shift equals here, that'll give me the plus sign as well. Your minus sign is going to be your hyphen, which is to the right of 0 and to the left of, so it's in between 0 and the equal sign. And no shift required to get that. But that's your minus sign. Your multiplication is your asterisk here. And that is found by shift A, or it's over on the 10 key number pad. And the division is your /, which is the same key as your question mark, no shift required, or again, it's on your 10 key number pad. I've got a 10 key number pad, so that's pretty useful. If not, you just have to figure out where they are and kind of remember that. But that's how you do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So now, talk a little bit more about these formulas, and you can create your own using those 4 operations. And again, you do it by equal sign. And with Chapter 1, it'll tell you to insert a formula that, I know for homework, grader project, it says insert a formula that'll calculate the percent of returns. And the percent of returns is the number of returns over the gross units sold. And you'll understand that once you see the spreadsheet for that. But it's basically, that's basic division. So you've got, let's say this was my number of returns and this was my gross units sold. So I would do this divided by this cell. And then I can make that a percentage. So that's 33. So this is a third of 6. 2 is a third of 6, which if you know your division, you'll know that's correct. And yeah, so that's kind of the basic setup. But they tell you exactly what cells you want to use and how you want to set up the function. So make sure you pay attention to the instructions. Also, another big thing is if you have a value that you're using, make sure you reference that cell, because if you're working in a real life situation where that value could be changing, you're going to want to make sure that if you use that value in your formulas, that the formulas will reflect the change. And they won't if you use just the number in that cell as opposed to the cell. So make sure if you have a number that you're using in a formula, always reference the cell. So I could do this as 2 divided by 6 and got that. But if these ever change, like say I change this to 3, that doesn't change at all. So always make sure you reference the cells that the values are in, not just the value. So if I were to change this, you can see that gets reflected by that. So that's how you do kind of your own formulas. And again, you'll be using that in Chapter 1. You're creating all your new ones. You don't have to use any built-in functions in Excel for Chapter 1 for either the Grader Project Homework or Grader Project Assessment. But you will be using the built-in ones in Chapter 2, and I believe in a little bit in Chapter 4, but you're mostly going to be using structure references in Chapter 4. So simple formula or simple functions like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, that sort of thing in Chapter 4. But for Chapter 2, any function formula that you're going to be using in Chapter 2 will be in the book. So if you're kind of confused as to what it's looking for, just look at your book chapter. Pages are going to be on the schedule. Or you can just flip to Excel Chapter 2. It should be the green page bottom. It's like it's got the little kind of green highlight near the page number. And just look for Chapter 2, and any formula that you'll be using for Chapter 2 is going to be in the book. And I'm going to talk about one formula called the VLOOKUP formula, and kind of show you how that works. So again, remember how I talked about you can reference a range. So I'm going to call this range grades. So Just do that, hit enter. If I go somewhere else and then highlight that range again, you can see that it's there. So VLOOKUP formula, I'll show you this and then I'll kind of show you what it's doing next. But you do, again, equal sign, you want to do VLOOKUP. And when this pulls up, you can either do tab or double click on it to pull that up. And the open parentheses, now these are the parameters. So parameters that you have for VLOOKUP formula are lookup value, table array, column index number, and range lookup. If you ever see these square brackets around a parameter right here, that means it's not necessary. Like you can use it if you want to, but unless the instructions specifically tell you to use a range lookup, you don't need it. And the other thing to look at is that commas separate each of the parameters. So make sure you use that. If you know what you're doing with the formula, then you can just enter the parameters here. If you don't, I highly recommend that you use this f of x right here. This enters a function arguments box, and it gives you the definition of the function as well as definitions of the parameters. So this particular one, for the definition of a VLOOKUP formula, is looks for a value in the leftmost column of a table, and then returns a value in the same row from a column you specify. By default, the table must be sorted in an ascending order. So you need, when it's saying by ascending order, either alphabetical or, so A to Z, or smallest to largest, as I do here. So first parameter that we want to look at is your lookup value, and as you look down here, is the value to be found in the first column of the table and can be a value, a reference, or text string. So I've got kind of your letter grades corresponding to what percentage you got, and then I've got 5 students here and their percentage that they have. Let's say this is a test, a herbology test, I guess you can go with. We'll stick with the Harry Potter theme. But lookup value, so it's the value to be found in the first column of the table. So this is your table. This is your first column. Now, I want something about these. So this person, George, got a 62%. Now, I'm not going to look up George to match it here to figure out what his letter grade is. I'm going to look at 62%. So I'm just going to click on that. As you can see, F4 is referenced, not 62, but F4. Again, if you have a value inside a cell that you want to use, make sure you use the cell reference and not the value inside it. Because if I change this to 63, I want my function to reflect that change. So again, just reference the cell, and we'll do table array. Table array is the table of text, numbers, or logical values in which data is retrieved. Table array can be a reference to a range or a range name. So we always want to use this table. So there are 2 ways I can do this. I can either do $A, $1 to $B, $6. And that'll reference these, we got 12 cells right there. Or the other way I can do it is, if you remember that I created a name range, I can just say grades, and it references the same cells. Okay, next is my column index number. This is the column number in the table array from which the matching value should be returned. The first column of values in the table is column 1. So this bit right here, the first column of values in table is column 1. This is what trips up a lot of students, because they want to assume, okay, well, I matched something in A, therefore I want to return B. But these letters and these numbers don't matter. I could have this down in D11 to here, for all I care. It doesn't matter. The thing that matters is this is column 1 of the table, this is column 2 of the table. Don't worry about the letters, don't worry about the rows. Column 1, column 2. Column 1, row 1, column 1, row 2, column 1, row 3, column 2, row 3, etc., etc. Column 1, column 2. So for this particular one, I'm matching this value in column 1, and I want to return column 2. So I just type a 2 there. And this one, we'll say, okay, D is the value to be returned, which if you look here, 62 is greater than 60 but less than 70, so he'll get a D. And that's kind of, it's a preview, it's a nice little preview, so you can make sure you're getting the right value. And then again, as you can see here, it's a little different than what you have when you look at the parameters here, but anything that's bolded, you have to have. It's a required parameter. Anything that's not bolded, like the range lookup, that's optional, so you don't need that. So we'll just hit OK, and we get D. You go up here, we got VLOOKUP, I'm looking up F4, which is this one, comparing it to grades, and returning column 2. And easy way to copy this down, again, just grab that to where you have the black plus, drag down to where you want it, and you can check my work. Okay, 64 should get a D, got a D. 90 gets an A, so it's going to be equal to 90, but less than 100, so they get an A. 60 or 75, so greater than 70, less than 80 gets a C, and 100% gets an A plus. And then say I wanted to have, I'll just say bad, really, or we'll call this one really bad. Say bad, average, and say okay, good job, and excellent. So say we want these to show up. Now I'm going to do kind of another to kind of show you how the column thing works. So again, I want to look up that, and since I added in a new column to my table, I'm just going to do absolute references here. So to C6, and here you can tell that it's referencing those cells, which is what I want it to do, and then column 3. And copy that down, and there you can see how that works. Just remember, whenever you're doing with the VLOOKUP formula in this last column index, this is column 1, this is column 2, this is column 3. So that's important. The other thing that is going to be useful to know is these words. These are considered strings, and so if you're comparing a so let's just do an if function. You'll be using these in chapter 2, in the chapter 2 assignments as well. So let's do if. So my logical test, I want to see if what this equals. So say if this one equals bad. And notice how I put bad in quotes. Anytime you have a word that you're comparing it to, you have to use quotes because it's considered a string. And in programming, you have to have quotes around your strings. Otherwise, it's going to think it's a variable name called bad, which it isn't. So then this one, value of true, value of false. And I know those two were both showing up as not bold or had the square brackets around it, meaning they're optional. The instructions do give you a value of true and a value of false. So if the instruction gives you an optional parameter, use it. Otherwise, you can ignore it. So we'll just do that. That's kind of how an if function works. Okay, now I just want to kind of show you, just for your enlightenment, I guess you could say, just kind of showing you what that VLOOKUP formula does. So in here, I'm declaring that it's a function, giving it a name, and telling which parameters I need to have in it. And so as you can recall, you had a kind of a lookup value here, a table array here, and a column index number. And then what you do is that's all you need to worry about. But what it's actually doing, it's creating a bunch of variables, getting some input from the user, which are these, and then doing something with that. So in this case, it's looking through the entire table and kind of looping through it and seeing, okay, where does whatever the lookup value, where does that ever equal is column 1 in the table that I'm getting. And then once it does, you figure out, okay, well, what column number do I want? And if that column equals this, then I want to do this. Otherwise, if it equals a different number, then I want to do this. And these are just kind of what it's doing to return the value. You don't need to worry about this. This is just kind of FYI. If you're ever interested in programming, anything like that, if you want to switch your major to computer science or just kind of see what programming is, this is what programming is. It's just kind of taking variables, manipulating them somehow, and returning a value. And this is what the VLOOKUP formula is basically doing. But again, you don't need to worry about this. Just worry about the name of the function and then the parameters that it's wanting. So that's just kind of give you a taste for what that actually is. But again, you do not need to worry about it. You just need to worry about the name and then the parameters. So that's pretty much it on Excel. If you have any questions, if you're in my Section 1 class, you can ask me during class time or via email. If you're in my online section, if you have questions, just via email, or you can set up a time to come chat with me. Again, my email is b.mccall@utah.edu. This is also on the syllabus, but that's where you email me. Do not email me through Canvas. Nobody has, since I put up the announcement that I'm not going to be responding to those anymore, so keep it up. Again, just b.mccall@utah.edu. And that'll be it for Excel.